Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here this early. It's really a pleasure to see all of you again for this second day of this conference on war and peace and robotics. So just some very fast initial remark. Well, you have seen yesterday we have spoken about peace. If you want, it was an easier subject. We were speaking about how robotics can speed up return to peace by detecting and neutralizing explosive devices that remain after a war, so by cleaning remnants of war, and we have seen it both at sea and inland. Now, today, we are going to the other side of the medal, that is questioning how robotics is influencing and changing war. And the fact that it's doing that is a clear evidence from the fields, unfortunately, so from what happened in the last few years in various theaters around the world. And what is also clear is that what has happened, it has an influence on what will happen and which are the plans that are laid down for the development and for the future of robotics at war. And of course, we are in a university. I'm myself a researcher working also in robotics, and there are a lot of questions that come with this. And in particular, the question is what we make of it. There are questions that concerns the ethical aspects. There are questions that concerns the legal aspects. There are ethical aspects that involve people like me, like researchers, and ethical aspects that involve people that use this machine or that plan to use or that lay down policies on the use of this machine. And I can tell you that since I started organizing this conference, I studied a lot, and the more I was studying, and the more I must say I've understood that the situation is complicated. There are easy simplifications. It's not the way to go. We have to first well understand what's going on, and then understand which are the different positions on the matter. So this is what made me organize this conference first in 2 days, and even this day on war in several parts. And in particular, we will have a first block that concerns what's going on for real. So I've asked the 3 different persons to tell us what's going on in the real wars around the world, and which are the plans for the future, and how what happened is changing the doctrine, the way of thinking to these things. Then we will have a first a series of ethical talks that are, I would say, applied ethics from the viewpoint of researchers. That is, how researchers face on the day-by-day work all the ethical aspects linked to the usage of robotics at war, or the possible usage of what they do in wars. And finally, in the second part of the day, we will have a session dedicated to ethical and legal aspects with various experts in the sector. And we will conclude with a very last session in which I've asked one speaker a very hard thing to do, that is to give us an overview of how science fiction imagined war with robots in the past and what it imagines for the future. So this is the starting point. I hope you will enjoy this day. I hope you will learn new things. I for sure will. And with this, without further blah blah from my side, I'm going to introduce the next speaker. So the next speaker is Mirko Campochiari. So Mirko Campochiari is I have to go to the beginning of his presentation because I clicked the wrong button. So we had a backward preview of everything you will present. So Mirko Campochiari is an historian and an analyst. He has his own independent think tank to which is associated a YouTube channel with more than 100,000 subscribers. He is quite well known, especially in the Italian community, for his analysis on the war, on the ongoing war, and for all the work that he does in open source intelligence. Last but not least, he has also recently written and published a book that I have somewhere. So this book in Italian, but he promised me that he's translating it in French and in English. That is Le parole della guerra, the words of war. That is a primer to military words and to military terms, which I have read some weeks ago and I find quite enjoyable. This he didn't expect probably me to do this, but he didn't even ask me or anything, so just to leave any disclaimer. I've spoken quite a bit, and I think he has a lot of interesting things to say, so I leave him the stage.
So thank you all. I start very fast. Drones evolution, not a revolution, in the sense that in history, we have a lot of experiments in that sense. I know that the media try to talk about hypersonic weapons, supersonic weapons, and things like that, but in reality, it's all stuff that exists since the 50s. So even if there is some tactical innovations, and drones offer some new capabilities, their impact falls short of the truly disruptive change that constitute a so-called revolution in the military. For the most part, the Russian and the Ukrainian drones have limited operative range and still need to be piloted by men. So in that sense, they are not broadly networked together. They are very, very small, which means their effects are very localized and relegated to the tactical level. So in part, drones have not offered Ukrainians or Russians a decisive edge on the battlefield because both parties are engaged in a fast-paced two-side cycle of innovation and emulation. They copy each other pretty much. After a month, whatever innovation the Ukrainians introduce is copied by the Russians. So they have similar numbers, similar technology, even if the Ukrainians started, of course, from a gap in that sense, and they are fastly recovering. So because many drones technology are commercial or dual use, in the sense you can use them for commercial stuff, but also for military stuff, they can be easily acquired. 90% of the drones used by Ukrainians are bought from the market, Chinese, for example. That's the most prominent type of drones that you can find on the battlefield, the quadcopter, octacopter, meaning that innovation quickly diffused to the enemy. Nevertheless, drones are changing how Ukrainian and Russian troops fight at the tactical level because drones see everything. In World War I, before an infantry attack, you need 30 minutes after the artillery. Now it's 30 seconds. That means whatever tactical maneuver you are going to do, in 30 seconds the enemy knows where you are and is already tracing the target. That moved pretty much every tactical level to a fast pace. For example, the Z assault troops that the Russians are using is completely adapted. The Ukrainians even managed to capture some documents to show the new doctrines that the Russians are applying. So I wanted to introduce also this principle, which is very interesting, of course, for engineers and people that work in robotics, the Pareto principles, also known as the rule of 80-20, that states that in almost all complex systems, 20% of the causes produce 80% of the effects. For example, in World War I, it was artillery and machine guns. Ishikawa wrote pretty much this diagram, which is a fish diagram, which is very interesting. where you can apply the 4M law: man, machine, methods, and materials. This is the 4 most important elements that depict pretty much what happens in a war. In this case, poor training, human errors, poor supervision, machine wrong use, poor maintenance, and obsolescence brings the effects. So the human factor is still one of the most important. As I said, in World War I, 80% of the casualties were made by machine guns and artillery. Nothing changed in this war. In the Russo-Ukrainian war, 80% of the casualties, which means wounded, Kia, Mia, are inflicted by artillery, but drones are involved in a way or another. They are everywhere, in every aspect of the war. So as we can see on the image, this is a drone that is doing recon and pretty much finding the targets for the artillery, or in some cases, if they are armed drones, like the Bayraktar that we have seen at the start of the war, they do that themselves. Still, they need a man behind, that is the pilot, pretty much, even if he's doing that remotely. So we all been accustomed with the Iranian drones. Recently, a big attack from the Iranians on Israel with a swarm of drones, together with the ballistic and cruise missiles. We know about what the Russians and Ukrainians are using. Some are old, like the Orlan 10, it comes from the 80s and the 90s. There is some evolution. We can see the Geran, which is the version that the Russians pretty much made based on the Shahed, which is the Iranian drone, which is the most common. So they're pretty similar. We have, of course, switchblade drones, which are sent by the Americans. They are suicide drones, but the techniques divide in 2 or 3 methods. The first-person view drones, the one that get piloted. Then there is drones that do recon, and then there is some new technologies, because of course there is electronic warfare, and the Russians have a big branch in that sense. So now we are trying to use different kind of drones that don't need any more GPS guide or a pilot. They pretty much pre-program the route. So during the day, there is a drone that do recon, and on the night, on the same path, they send another drone that have inside flashcards. The flashcard have inside all the route, so you can send it and nobody can block it pretty much, unless you want to block it kinetically. You need to shoot it down pretty much, if you can see it on the night, because it's really small. There is no way to interrupt the communication with the pilot because there is no pilot. And of course, the next step will be artificial intelligence, autonomous capabilities of recognizing the targets by themselves, and that, of course, bring a lot of ethical questions when there is no human behind taking the final decision. So why is not a new concept? Because pretty much in World War II, there were already some experiments. This is one of the most interesting, is the TDR-1. A Navy officer, Delmar Farney, was among the first visionary to realize that a remotely piloted aircraft could be used to deliver ordnance. Of course, without putting anybody at risk. It was used in the Marshall Islands. It was used on the last phase of the Pacific War. Not with much success, to be honest, but it was an experiment. So it's an old concept, even if you are talking a lot about drones. In reality, it comes from World War II, and we can even go behind in World War I. There were some experiments also in that sense. Same for the ground drones. This is a World War II experiment applied by the Germans. It's called the Goliath. Sorry for my German, but Ladungsträger was pretty much a small tank, pretty much, with a charge that was sometimes cable-guided, sometimes radio-guided, depending on the evolution of the Goliath, and it was used to destroy positions and, of course, enemy tanks. What is interesting is that what we see now on the field is pretty similar. Ukrainians are modifying air-sea cars, normal radio-controlled cars. So I just wait for the video to finish because we see the effect. And now we see what the Ukrainians are doing. You just pretty much strap a mine, this is an anti-tank mine, on a small radio-controlled car, and you apply the same things that happened in World War II. The Ukrainians, of course, miniaturized the system. The World War II were a bit bigger and slower. Now with these small cars, they can attack positions. They identify position with drones, and then they send these small cars to the enemy position to blow the trenches. They also apply these methods against vehicles. And also there is more further variants where they pretty much chain a lot of mines, and you can use drones pretty much to speedily deploy line of mines wherever you need without the use of men. And that was very important during the Avdiivka phase, where the Russians tried to encircle the city, and they suffered huge losses because the Ukrainians used a lot of these small cars with a lot of mines and managed to block the path of the advance of the Russians. So this is an evolution because there is a huge system made by the civilians. All these modifications are made usually by amateurs. 80% of the people that do this modification, they do that in a small garage, and then the military adopted some of these civilians' technology. So it's really interesting to see how this is moving and how also the entire country is involved in the war. Because since majority of these drones are civilians, the civilians started to modify that for sending food, medicine, sometimes even recover their own troops that got lost. And you have also some particular cases where Russian troops surrendered pretty much to a drone. The drone started to communicate with a lost Russian soldier. They established communication, and the drone bring the Russian to the Ukrainian line to surrender. So that's interesting because now they are developing also recovering drones to bring in total autonomous way wounded from the field. So you can apply that not only to the military stuff. Another case which is very important, I bring an Italian case of World War II where the Italian made a raid on Suda Bay with small explosive boats. They managed to damage the HMS York, and now we can see something similar that is changing what happened in the Black Sea. The Ukrainians developed, allegedly, together with some English support in that sense, explosive boats. This is an evolution. The model they are using at the moment, the most proficient, is the Magura 5, and it's changing completely what's happening because Ukraine have no fleet. So it's interesting to see that a country with no fleet is winning, at least on the sea, a war against the Russian Navy. Of course, this brings a lot of factors. You have no targets, so pretty much you have free room to do whatever you want. These drones are so small and so fast, and they are remotely controlled, that they are very hard to be hit by Navy defense, point defense, because they pretty much go on the surface of the water. We can see on this slide that a third of the Russian Black Sea fleet is either sunk or damaged, including the Admiral, of course, the Moskva. So with these small drones, they manage, of course, to hit a good part of the destroyers, of the frigates that launched the Caliber missile, were participating in the strategic missile campaign against the infrastructure of Ukraine. But most important for the Ukrainians, they manage the Ropucha class, which are pretty much landing ships, ships that bring materials to the troops of the Russians deployed in the Zaporizhia corridor. As we can see, pretty much all the Ropucha class are either destroyed or damaged. The Russians bring more, and they get hit more. This is a video, sorry for the quality, but this is what internet gave us, of a small Russian frigate in Sevastopol that is under attack by a small drone. And as you can see, the frigate is unable to hit the small drone because the point defense don't have enough ability to lower their guns. And this is a big problem, because if we can expand this problem to what happened, for example, in the Red Sea, or what can happen with the Iranians or the Chinese, swarm of small drones like this one pretty much render the majority of the big ships useless. There is no defense for this system. The Russian pretty much shoot them with the normal light weapons from the deck of the ship. That's the only way you can intercept them. And in the night, as you can see, the ships are totally unaware of the presence. This is a first-person view, means that what we are seeing is exactly what the pilot, the Ukrainian pilot of this drone, is watching. It's a thermal vision during the night, and as you can see, the enemy ship is completely unaware of the presence of the drone. It brings a lot of charge with it, and also it hit on the surface level between the water and the level of the ship. So whatever damage is going to do, usually is fatal, because it is going to bring water inside the ship. As you can see, they're completely unaware. You can see that because there is no answer from the ship itself. And this has caused a lot of problems to the Russians. They initially started to bring all the ships in Sevastopol because they feel it was secure. And then when all the eggs were in one basket, which is exactly what the Ukrainians wanted, they started to use Neptune missiles and Storm Shadows and other kind of missiles. So whenever they are not safe in the sea, they are also not safe inside a big shipyard. They even hit a submarine, which was on a dry dock. So with these methods, you can pretty much force a fleet, even if you have no one, to disperse itself and not participate anymore. This is how FPV drones work. This is an example of a very civilian one, modified with a heat charge, which usually were the charge of the RPG-7, a normal man-handled anti-tank weapons from the 70s, to give you an idea. So they modified that, and we can see the vulnerabilities of the tanks at the moment. Even the Abrams, the Challenger, the Leopards, any tank, including the Russians, is vulnerable to this system, because essentially it comes from the sky and it goes exactly on the weak points of the tanks. So in the case of the Russians, since they have 360-degree ammunition inside their tanks, any penetration from a heat charge like this, it means detonation, catastrophic detonation. In the best cases for the Western tanks, we have ammo on a separate system with blowout panels, but anyway the vehicle will be destroyed, usually impossible to recover. Of course, you can use electronic warfare in this type of drones, but now the pilots have become so good that they are flying pretty much at 1 or 2 meters from the ground. They hide behind the houses, they hide behind the tree lines, and they pretty much do a sort of pop-up attack like in a helicopter. They just jump up, identify the target, go in. This is an example. I slowed it because it goes very fast, and this is the effect. This is a Russian tank blowing out from an FPV drones. There is no protection for this kind of system. Even in the West, we need to pretty much sort up something, either active defense systems like the Trophy or electronic warfare. Recently, we have seen the Russian trying to do what we call cope cages, in the sense that they try to cover a tank with metal stripes or anything that can put the distance between the drone and the surface of the tank. These are other examples of how the pilot of the drones are using them for anything. They destroy small connection systems, small radars, small positions inside houses. You can find videos about drones entering inside trenches, even in small windows, smaller than a meter. Even logistics is not safe. You can see here an Ukrainian drone entering pretty much a garage where Russians were repairing their vehicles. They identify a Terminator, which is anti-infantry vehicle, and they destroy everything. So there is no safety. You can see the level of penetration that they can do inside houses, inside hangars, inside trenches. This is causing a lot of problems, also psychological problems. I have read a lot of interviews where even volunteers from Canada and other places, people with experience, special troops, retired from Ukraine after 6 months, saying that the psychological damage that you receive by staying in this environment is huge, because on the night you hear the drones and you don't know if it's enemy or if it's your. So people, what's going on? Thank you. So people are very, sorry a second, okay. So people are very aware of this situation. It's impossible to sleep, and you need always to run when there is a drone. You can see even images that bring a lot of ethical stuff, like a drone literally fighting with a single man, like hide and seek, where the men try to dodge the drone, and it's pretty harming to see things like that. The amount of drones that there is around is so huge at the moment that they are used even for single infantry. This is what the Russians are doing. There are field modifications that resemble what happened in World War II on the Bocage, when the Americans made a sort of field modification to destroy the tree line. We call them cope cages, or this is now come as the turtle tank. It's a Russian tank surrounded by metal because it avoids to be hit by the FPV drones, or you need a lot of drones to go inside. Of course, it limits its vision, its ability to shoot, but what matters is to bring the troops to the point where they need to unload and attack the trenches. Other modification, you can see the small chains. These also can be used to stop the drones. As you can see, every type of defense is pretty much passive. Nothing is active, even if they are trying to place some 360-degree electronic warfare modules around the tank. But this is a very rudimental stuff. Some numbers, because of course, as we said, initially, Ukrainian auto-innovated Russia with commercial technology and software, because they need to do with whatever they find. But the Russians quickly adapted and emulated the Ukrainian success. In a key example, Ukraine pioneered the use of first-person view drones, kamikaze drones, and began creating cheap kamikaze drones from new ways, including cardboard drones. An Australian engineer made a cardboard drone, and it sent the project to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians just replicate that, and they're using even the cardboard drones. Of course, you can't use that in a weather like this, but usually in the summer in Ukraine it's pretty fine. So the price of the drones are lowering a lot, and this brings a lot of concern against defense, especially when we'll go further in this examination. As you can see, the majority of the drones are used against infantry. In this case, the first-person view, especially on the Ukrainian side, are used against enemy infantry because they have a lot of numbers problems. While the FPV drones are usually used by Ukrainians, the Russians are fastly growing in the numbers. And with the new fabrics they are made in Tatarstan, of course, all Iranian made the drones under license. They are fastly recovering. What's interesting is that the Russians prefer to concentrate on hit defenses position instead of vehicles or manpower, partially because Ukrainians have less disponibility of tanks, and they tend to use them scarcely, of course. But what's interesting is that usually the Russians use bigger drones with bigger chargers to destroy Ukrainian trenches. That's their main focus, together with the FAB bombs that we have all seen around. What's happening in Ukraine is also that volunteer networks have performed an unprecedented role in acquiring, modifying, and building commercial for both Ukrainian and Russian troops. There is even crowdsourcing programs everywhere. Both in Russia, both in Ukraine, people pretty much made crowdfunding campaigns, and they try to build a new type of drones or acquiring drones of different type and quality. What's happening on the military level? So if in the first year and a half everything was done, let's say, in a raw manner between civilians and military, whatever you call acquire, good enough. Now the Ukrainians, I think, are the first army in the world that created drone special forces. It's a branch of the army. It's something completely new. So this is how it works, the structure of a military brigade in Ukraine. They have implemented and they have added to every mechanized battalion, assault battalions, specialized drone units. This is a simplification, of course. They also created a communication system between. So every company, to give you an idea, it have at least two recon pilot that use only drones to do recon and find the targets, and two drones to hit vehicles. Then, if the enemy have a lot of troops, they pretty much incorporated that system through a communication system that I'm going to show you, and they can arrange pretty much bigger attacks with that system. Here you can see the process of deploying this technology on the battlefield, that begin with the reconnaissance drones, equipped with high-spec cameras, and of course now there is some evolution, like thermic, night vision, which before not was around because, of course, the majority of the commercial drones don't have this kind of capabilities. So the operator pretty much search for the target, identify the target, and it sends everything through this system. It's called the Kropiva. I hope that's the correct pronunciation for the Ukrainian, or Kropiva. Centralized communication and targeting. When targets are spotted, their coordinates are relayed to the commander through secure messages and entered into Kropia, this system. A digital map containing aggregated data on Russian targets. Every commander have this kind of tablets, and you can see every information about the enemy troops. There is also some security problems, because initially the Ukrainians made some errors, in the sense that the commander in Kherson was able to see what was happening in Kharkiv, and the Russian hacker from the Donbass People Republic hacked that system. So now they pretty much divided the system between small sectors, because there is no need for a commander in Kherson to know what's happening in Zaporizhia. So they pretty much made a small compartmental system also for this communication system. So if one of these tablets ends in the hands of the enemy, at best he can get information around 20, 30 kilometers square around him, and not anything more. So the commanders then determine the best methods to strike a particular target. Ukraine, of course, has more limited resources than the Russians, so they need to pretty much decide which target to hit to preserve the ammunitions. As you can see, there is a brigade headquarters that have a bigger station for this kind of communication. There is the drone unit that identifies the enemy target. The drones communicate with the brigade headquarters. The brigade headquarters decide if it's worth to shoot the target. That coordinate from the drone gets sent to the artillery. And all this process, usually it takes 30 seconds to 1 minute. That's why also the war is roughly in a stalemate situation, because when everybody can see what the other is doing, and there is no surprise effect, it's very hard to organize offensive or big mechanized operation, because the enemy have the ability to answer in 30 seconds to 1 minute to whatever tactical action you are going to do. Electronic warfare, which is the most important way to defend against these drones. The systems have proved to be the most effective way to stopping the drones. Both sides is using electronic warfare. Of course, the Ukrainians have a disadvantage in that. Russia is doing electronic warfare since the 60s. When the drone signal is jammed, the pilot loses the ability to control the craft and can no longer see the video signal. You can see that very often when pretty much it loses the video. So what's happening is that they're trying to avoid that by inventing new methods. One method, which is a sort of field modification, is the electronic rifles. Electronic warfare rifles, they're sort of big anti-drone rifle. This is an example. The problem is that they have a very small range, and you need to be there, which is a risk. Essentially, you need to locate the enemy drone, point the gun, and hope that it's going to do the job to bring the drones down. It has an advantage, of course, because now you have the drone. The problem is that you need to be physically there. At the maximum, have 1 kilometer, 1.5 of range. So how they avoid the electronic warfare? This is the newest innovation, the drone force recent evolution, the SIG, or Hawks 411. It flies autonomous with flash cards. As you can see from the video, pretty much the Ukrainian load the flash card with the flash card that was in the recon drone. It gets transferred to this drone, which acquired the path of the flight, which was precedently done by another drone. You can see the small flash card. They're going to load it, and this drone can fly usually in the night because they can see it. There is no pilot, there is no communication, so electronic warfare can't do anything. It gets launched to the enemy position. It goes there, it bombs the position that was previously spotted, and then it flies back, hopefully. So this is a way to avoiding the communication between the drones, so it can't be interrupted. And probably when you're going to integrate this with artificial intelligence, you can have swarm of drones that will have completely autonomy to identify the target, decide what it is, bomb, and come back without any human intervention. Use of cell phone network. The Russian force sometimes are using the Ukrainian Kyivstar SIM cards, cell phone cards, using the enemy cell phone network against itself. So sometimes they place these SIMs, which are normal SIMs from cell phones, inside the Shahid drones and use the Ukrainian cell phone system against them. Because of course the Ukrainians need that for their own communication. This happened also on the start of the war, when the Ukrainians were using their system, because the Russians were using their system to identify Russian position. This is also a sort of Trojan horse way of using the drones. The drones are not only used for tactical reasons, against tanks, against positions, against infantry, they are also used for long-range attacks. If you remember, the last winter there was a big Russian campaign against the infrastructure of Ukraine. Every missile attack was also coadjuvated with a lot of wave of drones. And recently, we can see what happened between Iran and Israel. Same tactics. That means that there is drones for tactical purpose and drones for strategic purpose. As we can see, in yellow, this is the path of the drones, usually launched by the Zaporizhia corridor. And they also work for saturate enemy air defense. Initially, the Ukrainians made mistakes in that sense. They used a lot of Western anti-air systems to destroy even the drones, and it's completely pointless because the cost, respect to what you're going to destroy, is like sometimes 100 to 1. If you use a SMPT or a Patriot, or if you use other missiles, you're going to destroy a drone which is worth $10,000, and you are going to waste 2 to 4 million for a missile. Similar problem happened to the Israeli with the Iron Dome, because the Tamir missile cost around 3-4 million, and they need to pretty much destroy rockets. So as you can see, Iran used the same system. They send 5 waves of drones together with ballistic and cruise missiles. The average cost of the whole attack of the Iranians was around $90 million, while even ex-Israeli special forces and Mossad commanders and directors evaluated that between the Western and the Israeli, we spent 1 billion, 1.3 billion, to give you an idea. So 14 to 1, 15 to 1. This brings a lot of interesting points, which is cost effect. I remember when at the start of the war, everybody was laughing at these very cheap and slow drones that the Iranians sent to the Russians. In reality, if you're going to study some cases about the Houthi attack in Saudi Arabia in 2019, 21 and 22, the Houthi with 90 drones and some ballistic missiles managed to cause $140 million of damage to the Saudi Arabia on some refineries, but most important, they managed to make the Saudi waste their Patriot missiles. So it was very cost effective. So what we need, high-low, in the sense that if you want to block this kind of attacks, you can't only rely on super sophisticated anti-air systems. You need to have what we call SHORAD, short-range air defense, and point defense. To give an example, the Ukrainians learned the lesson, the fact that you can't use all the anti-air systems just for destroying drones. So they asked the German the Gepards, which is an anti-air system of the 70s. This is a good way to balance the cost for destroying these drones and to have a point defense. Saudi Arabia is running out of Patriot missiles in its conflict with the Houthis, and Ukrainian air defense missiles are running out, Zelensky warns. This is the way to balance. And this is a big problem because we are not prepared for this kind of attacks in the whole of Europe. And this is the way the Ukrainians are using their long-range drones to attack the enemy system, the refinery system. They send them very low, probably with pre-programmed SIM card, so the enemy can't see them and they can't use electronic warfare, and they are hitting the strategic infrastructure of the refinery system of the Russian. If you can't hit the tanks on the field, remove the fuel. That's an indirect way to cripple the Russian system. A small country like Ukraine launches around 300 drones in the last 3 months against 14 Russian refineries and managed to, for a bit of time, of course, reduce the entire Russian production by 15%, which not seems much, but when you go to see the volume of the money involved, that's very cost effective. Recently, we have seen the Ukrainians even modify a small transport plane that hit one of the Shahid factory in Tatarstan. That's over 1,200 kilometers from the Ukrainian front. That means that in the last 6 months, the Ukrainian went from hitting with FPV drones on the trenches and sometimes logistical stuff 60, 80 kilometers from the front line, to hitting Belgorod, to hitting refineries around Russia, and now even hitting in Tatarstan. That means their capabilities in terms of range is augmenting. And that means that probably the next generation of drones will be able to hit around 2,000, 3,000 kilometers, bringing pretty much the war inside Russia. So what we need to think about is the fact that small countries like the Houthis, which do not have a real army, is able to disrupt the entire world commerce just with some drones. And we need to adapt to defend from this kind of warfare, which is a swarm of FPV drones, swarm of sea drones, probably soon swarm of submarine drones. That means having the ability to balance. It's good to have doctrines like multi-domain warfare, where you have professional people with super sophisticated weapons to defend yourself, but you need also to have the lower level to defend against these kind of attacks. This is something Taiwan is studying, because the Chinese are probably going to use a swarm of drones. The Russian and the Chinese are trying also to utilize old airplanes and transform them into drones. The idea is pretty much to saturate the enemy defense with drones, automated airplanes, and inside that using your real plane for doing the real mission. So the enemy is going to waste pretty much their defenses. And this brings a lot of problems, because it's incredibly cheap. It's not a technology that is hard to acquire. So a lot of countries, even North Korea, can get access to this system. And everybody is copying everybody. To give you an idea, recently there is a lot of civilian warfare in Birmania, and they're using exactly the same tactics that have been developed in Ukraine. We have seen also with the attack of Hamas, and Hamas was using exactly the drones in the same way that the Ukrainians are using them. So everybody is watching what's happening in Ukraine and taking lessons. So I thank you all for listening to me. That's all.